Listen, everybody's got a worldview. Me, you, everybody else. Actions don't come from nowhere. There's a belief that's rooted in something. You believe in something. And those beliefs create thoughts. Those thoughts create actions. We understand how that works. If you don't have a biblical worldview, if a political person, a candidate, an elected official, a campaign consultant, a media advisor, a TV buy person for a campaign, if they don't have a biblical worldview, how can we expect them to do the things that raise the level of righteousness in the nation? Welcome to Faith Wins. I'm Chad Conley. This is a place for real conversations, real leadership, and real faith. Because when pastors lead, faith wins. Hey everybody, Chad Conley back here with the Faith Wins podcast. Great to see you again. I know I've already seen a bunch of you in your state, and we're going to be in your state too, because pastors matter. When pastors lead, faith wins, as we say all the time. I want to talk to you about a topic today that I think applies every time I go into a new room. And it's really because every time I go into a new room, there are new pastors there who've either not been around me, not been involved with Faith Wins before, who might even think that, hey, we shouldn't do anything in the political world. And see, I don't believe it's political at all. I think it's all biblical. I believe God's big enough to be in everything all the time, 24/7, as they say, even 365 days a year, 365 in a leap year. And I try to repeat that because I do think that people who hate our God have defined for pastors, you shouldn't be engaged. You shouldn't go and get involved in the government realm and the political realm because that's going to offend somebody. Well, look, we're the ones who don't want to offend them, right? We want to reach them for the Lord. The truth is, we're trying to reach them for the Lord in all aspects. When he told us to go and make disciples and to spread the gospel, that making disciples part means we've got to teach them how to interact with the world. My friend George Barton says that the number one reason people leave churches, they don't think it applies to their life. They don't connect the dots to what's going on in their lives and what's going on in the culture to how the Bible tells us to react to that. So I want to talk about something today in that regard, because I think a lot of us as Christians don't understand the political world. And every time we dive into it, we get upset. It doesn't work out the right way. We're dealing with people, right? We're dealing with people. And all of you go to churches, you're on committees, you have committee meetings, you have deacons, elders, leadership, business conference meetings. All that is politics, if you want to think of it that way, because it's just dealing with people. That's all politics is. But when we start dealing with the political class, it's different. I'll give you that. It's different. So when I was a state party chairman, I really got to know the political class world. I got to meet with all these consultants, brilliant people. They know what they're doing. Man, they know the numbers. They know the data. They know how to pull information out on voters. They know how to mail merge and match voter rolls to what people are feeling. They know how to message to people. But what I found sitting in the rooms with those consultants at every level, I've sat in meetings at every level of politics in America. And I got to tell you, most of the consultants don't understand you either. So when you're feeling like, hey, Pastor, you're feeling like, I don't understand this political stuff. I don't want to deal with it. It's dirty business. Yes, yes, yes. I agree with you. You're spot on. Correct. I want you to understand they don't understand you either. I made a joke. I had dealt with some interesting political people when I was at the RNC, the Republican National Committee. I was a senior staffer under Chairman Reince Priebus. I guess I was one of the few, if not only, but probably few senior staffers that didn't go to work in the first Trump White House. And it's when I started Faith Wins. Y'all know my story. I was putting a family back together. Dana and I had only been married a little bit. We had 4 kids. When we married, they were all under 10 and all had lost a parent to suicide. I didn't need to be in Washington, D.C., working out of a cubicle in the White House. And I started Faith Wins on a whim. But in the run up to that, I started dealing with a lot of political consultants. And I made a joke on CNN that most political consultants don't understand Christians. They certainly don't understand pastors. In fact, their last interaction with their Bible was last Thursday when their maid dusted around it. And I know it's kind of funny for us. I don't know if they enjoyed it very much. But to use their words, a lot of them, and not all of them, I'm not trying to broad brush it, but I want to prepare you for what you're dealing with. And I've talked about this on other podcasts, and I hope I talk about it a lot because I think it's one of the real hindrances to us as Christians. Because, yeah, you can vote and you can kind of get involved, but when you dive in a little bit deeper, you're going to run into these people and they don't understand you and you don't understand them. Part of that problem is most of them that I've dealt with don't have a biblical worldview. They don't see things through a God lens. They don't wake up every morning wondering, what would the Lord have me do? Who would the Lord have me talk to? What's my role as a Christian today? And for you as pastors, what am I supposed to do to shepherd my people more effectively? Political consultants aren't even thinking about the biblical worldview side. And while I made it a joke, they're not interacting with the Bible. I got to tell you, that's a high number. Now, a lot of them will say I'm a Christian, but they'll tell you they're very casual in their faith. And I don't know if you've been to Washington, D.C., but that seems to be going around. And anytime you get around the halls of power, when you find people of solid, unwavering faith, they seem to be less in number. And we know this. We're Christians. We're always going to be outnumbered, but with God on our side, we're always a majority. So I tell you this, and I do this podcast to make you understand. The more you get involved with us, the more we're going to interact with political consultants, campaign staffs, super PAC people, donors of the political class, all these people. And the donors, by and large, are going to be a lot more faith-filled than most of the political consultants in the political class world. But I want you to take a step back and think about it. You're dealing with a lot of people who, if they're not non-believers, they're new baby Christians. And that's how you got to treat them. You got to understand that. And part of what I did when I started Faith Wins was to be a buffer for you as a pastor with those political campaigns. I hate to be even remotely crass about it, but I've rarely, if ever, sat in a political meeting, presidential campaigns, gubernatorial campaigns, Senate campaigns, congressional, state house campaigns, that some consultant didn't say, who's dealing with the blankety blank Christians? It's like on repeat. It happens all the time. Like I said, I can't really name a campaign that there wasn't somebody there. They want to check a box. They want to say, hey, let's send our candidate to the top 5 churches and let them speak. They don't even understand y'all aren't going to let them speak for the most part. Or, hey, let's call around and get everybody, all the pastors to endorse our candidate. They don't understand. Very, very, very few pastors will endorse a candidate. They don't understand. But you know why they don't understand? They don't understand a biblical worldview. We understand the biblical worldview is, how do I see things through a God lens? How do I wake up every day and everything I'm dealing with, every activity I'm in, every interaction personally, relationship wise I'm in, my job, my career, it all has to do, how do I see things through a God lens? I tell my Sunday school class, I've told y'all, I told my kids, we got to look at our lives and say, how does God want me to handle this? What's the Lord looking to for me? He doesn't need me and you. He's going to fulfill his purposes, but he does work through willing vessels. I believe our only ability we are required by God to have is availability. I want to be available to the Lord. So how do I see this issue and look through a God lens to see it? How do I not look through a Chad or a polls, Pew or Gallup polling? How do I see, okay, what does God say? And it just goes back to scripture. And so, I challenged my Sunday school class several years ago. How much are you reading the Bible? Or how much are you spending time in the Bible? And this applies to the political consultants. And I'll bet every one of you has a Bible reading habit. I like my quiet time in the morning. Dana's not up yet, and I get up early. I can have my cup of coffee and I read the word and I study and I do my prayer list, and that's kind of my Bible discipline. I've been doing that for over 30 years of knowing that I need to be in the word, not for you or anybody else. I need to be in the word. And so when you start talking to people about what's their Bible habit, you realize a lot of people don't have it. And so I was in my Sunday school class a few years ago and I was asking them, how many of y'all reading the Bible? And not enough of them said yes. These are This is a little Baptist church in Newberry, South Carolina. And I realized they're not reading the word. And I started asking them, why aren't you reading the Bible? What is it? What is it? And the number one answer was, we don't have time. We don't have time. So if that applies to me and you as Christians who are faithful going to church every week, what do you think it means to political consultants that they're in the heat of battle? Most of them don't have a spiritual discipline. Most of them don't have a real solid faith a lot of times. So they're not in the word. So my Sunday school class, I literally took the first Bible that I read, as I say, Genesis all the way to maps, cover to cover, was a 1-year Bible. One of my mentors, we were driving along Highway 78 between Athens and Winder, Georgia one day, and I was being mentored for business. And I hope I've told this story a lot, but a lot of you hadn't heard it. And he had his Bible on the dash of his car. And I said, Jamie, what does your Bible have to do with business? I mean, I love it. I'm a Christian too. And he said, nothing but everything. Oh man, come on. Now I'm kind of confused, Jamie. What are you talking about? He said, have you ever read it? Well, I read parts of it, and I was probably 25, 26 at the time. And I was a believer. I'd give my heart to the Lord at a youth camp in 1976. I was 13 years old. And they said, no, have you ever read it all the way? And this is where I got it from Genesis to maps, cover to cover. And I said, Jamie, I'm sorry to say I have not read the entire thing, Genesis to maps. He did a U-turn on Highway 78, and I went back to Athens. We went to a Christian bookstore. For you younger guys, there used to be buildings that had books in there, and you could go pick them out without clicking a button. You had to go actually pick them out. And so we went there, and he pointed out a 1-year Bible, and here's what he said. He said, that's how I got started reading the Bible. It's a 1-year Bible. It has a Psalm, a proverb, an Old Testament, and a New Testament. So you end up reading 4 or 5 chapters in a day. It takes 15 to 20 minutes typically. And that's how I started reading the Bible. So in my Sunday school class in Newberry, I took that old Bible that's fallen apart. It's turned down, it's highlighted, it's underlined, my notes are in there. And my class told me I don't have time to read the Bible. Okay, well, how much time does it take? They didn't know because they didn't know where to start. So I just opened it up to that day's reading. And of course, there was an Old Testament chapter, a New Testament chapter or two, a Psalm, and a proverb. And I took it and I said, I want you to just read. Now, 4 different people. One read the Old Testament section, one read the New Testament section, one read the Psalm, and one read the proverb. And I made them hand the book to the next person, knowing that would take a little bit more time, knowing that it would, waste a few seconds to transfer it, to show them this is not a lot of your time, y'all. This doesn't take long to stay in the word and immerse yourself. And the average time, and I got a buddy in my Sunday school class that remembers it like this, Greg Fulmer, he could tell you, but I think the longest time we did 4 different days. I did it back to back to back to back weeks to demonstrate to them this is not a big deal. And I think the average time was 15 minutes and 40 something seconds. So I told my class, what are you doing for less than 16 minutes to waste time that your eternal value ought to be a whole lot higher in your mind than that 16 minutes you're wasting? And of course, the heads hung. Oh, I'm sorry. I never saw it that way. And the other day, I had a lady in the class who had grown up in a church that didn't read the word. And she came to me and said, Chad, I just want to tell you, until you did that demonstration and had us read from the Bible, I didn't even understand that it's just not that big a deal, but I need to make it a priority. Now, let's fast forward to the political consultants. I know probably, I don't know, 100 people in the political class, both in my state, most of your states. Of course, nationally, I know most of the political consultants. And I would say that less than 10% of them have a Bible reading habit that they've told me about. So let's say I'm off by half. Let's say that 20%, 1/5 of them. They don't understand you because they don't have the same worldview. You and I don't deal in the political world. We don't understand them either. Here's what I'll tell you about them. I want you to understand first where we are. They're not reading the word. They don't understand what you're reading. They've probably not read what Jesus said in Matthew 5, being salt and light. And he says we're to be salt and light, but he says if the salt has lost its savor, it's good for nothing, to be thrown in the street and trodden before the feet of men. If the salt isn't salty, y'all, we're no good. How can we be an encouragement, a support, an enhancement, an effect, an influence on society if we're not salty salt and bright light? That was Jesus' point. So my point to people who say they're not supposed to be involved in politics is tell me how you're supposed to be salt and light if you're not voting biblical values, if you're not becoming informed about the issues, and if you're not encouraging the sphere of influence that God's given to you with how those things affect you from a biblical standpoint. How can you be salt and light? Like, I don't know about you, but being told by the Father you're good for nothing sounds like a bad day. Sounds like a really bad day. Now let's transpose that to the political class looking at you and I. They don't relate to you, y'all. If they're not in church, they're not in church meetings like you are. They're not preparing a sermon. They're not visiting sick people in the hospital. I talked to, I don't know, 5 or 6 pastors today, and everything you're dealing with, that y'all deal with, that's what I heard on the phone today those pastors are dealing with. I'll spend time with a bunch of pastors tomorrow in a pastor meeting. Same thing. I'll hear about all this stuff. The political people aren't doing that because they're not having to engage much past their family. Their world, I got to say, it's probably the most intense I've ever seen. Our lives can get intense because we're dealing with wife, kids, family, finances, job, career. Y'all deal with churches. All that's very intense. Theirs is on a timeline that's almost indescribable. During the 2024 election, we did 79 pastor meetings with presidential candidates. We did them with President Trump. We did Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, pretty much everybody running. We did meetings with all of them. Only one that was my own governor from years ago wouldn't do a pastor meeting. That's weird to me, but we did 79. And I tell you, watching our pastor teams watch the minute to minute time clock, the timeline that those candidates operated under was eye opening. And they'd say stuff like, I thought I was busy. And look, they're no different than you. We're no different than them. We're all busy people. We fill our times, but the demands on somebody running for office are intense. They've got the media calling, they're under bright lights and scrutiny every single second. They got all these staffers they're paying to be productive and do something that looks like it's productive. So they're creating busy work. They're looking at polling, they're looking at data, they're looking at messaging and messaging options. How do we message this? They are on all the time. It's a lot like pastors are. You guys don't get time off. You got to always be on. I don't care if you go to Walmart to pick up a jug of milk and a loaf of bread. You got to always be on. That's not a bad thing, but I think the political class is on at a level that I sure don't relate to very much. It's intense. And so we want to be a blessing of them. When I started building out Faith Winds and me and the Lord met about this and I'd seen what was working, I decided to put those two groups together, the political class and the spiritual class, the pastors who could have influence. Now, also understand they don't understand your influence. I had a candidate, I shouldn't mention the name, but one of the front runners for president in 2024. And he didn't want to come to a pastor meeting, and this was in New Hampshire, because it was only going to be about 40 people there, 40 pastors. And so when the staffer came in and said, we just didn't think it was worth the time, I said, well, what are they doing? Well, they're prepping for a TV interview. And I said, well, that pastor's got 5 locations, a couple thousand people in church, and that pastor's got 1,200 in church. And that one leads an association of 30 other churches. And that one right there's got a prayer ministry at the Capitol. So he didn't have enough time to come and spend time with 40 pastor leaders who have an influence with 20 something thousand voters in your state. They don't understand. They don't understand the influence that you as pastors really have and possess and can utilize. So we need to grasp that we don't understand them and what they're going through, and they don't understand us. So when we put this together, just the whole build out of Faith Winds, most of my thinking was I want to connect pastors and faith leaders to political thought leaders, candidates, and elected officials at every level, not to endorse them or say you must vote for this person or must vote for that party. No, no, no. That they can do it. Pastors, you can do what you want to do. But I want it. My goal was to have influence. I wanted to increase the level of Christian influence. I want to increase the level of righteousness in the country. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. We know the scripture, we got it memorized. Who's going to raise the level of righteousness in a nation if it's not God's people? Who are you waiting on? Are you looking for the non-believers on the school board who think it's okay for boys to go participate in girls' sports or to, go to the bathroom with girls? You think those people are going to raise the level of righteousness? Do you think the people that are okay with, genital mutilation of children as young as 8, you think they're raising the level of righteousness? Do you think that people who are okay aborting a baby at 9 months, do you think they're raising the level of righteousness? Do you think people who defend illegal aliens who come in and murder, rape, maim innocent Americans, do you think those people who have that worldview are raising the level of righteousness in the nation? No, they're not. They're not. And listen, if God's people aren't engaged and aren't connected to what's going on in the culture, and we get out of it, hey, I give up. And we know scripture says, be ye separate. We're going to separate ourselves. We've done such a good job of separating ourselves. We've left the playing field. In a lot of ways, we're not even in the game. And so when you see a school board or a county council or a legislature at the federal or the state level do something that looks like those are a bunch of non-believers, you're right. You're exactly right. That was the problem, is the non-believers were imposing their worldview. Listen, everybody's got a worldview. Me, you, everybody else. Actions don't come from nowhere. There's a belief that's rooted in something. You believe in something. And those beliefs create thoughts. Those thoughts create actions. We understand how that works. If you don't have a biblical worldview, if a political person, a candidate, an elected official, a campaign consultant, a media advisor, a TV buy person for a campaign, if they don't have a biblical worldview, how can we expect them to do the things that raise the level of righteousness in the nation? That's on us. So here's the political people, here's the spiritual people. They're not coming to you to understand what you understand. I hope they do. In fact, I hope these relationships that we're building and creating an atmosphere for help lead them to the Lord. That's my prayer. We got to go with spiritual people over to where they are. We got to put ourselves in those environments. That's why we create pastor meetings in all these different states. We think we're going to end up doing somewhere over 100 pastor meetings between summertime 2026 and the fall elections to affect the midterms. We're not going to affect it for a candidate or a party. We're going to affect it for the level of righteousness in the country. We're going to affect it for Christian involvement. We're going to affect it for you as pastors telling your churches, you got to register to vote and you got to go vote biblical values. You got to understand the issues. You can use voter guides. We got all those on our faithwinds.org site. I think you're going to see a rendition of that, a script here that you can go straight to Faithwinds and click to that, and you can find your information for your state. We're recommending that every pastor in America do a nonpartisan voter registration drive around July 4th. Pretty important. We're celebrating the country's 250th this time around, but then do 2 more in the fall. And I like to do back-to-back early to mid-September before early voting starts. But, after people finish up the summer vacations and the travel and we get past Labor Day, I think you ought to do back-to-back voter registration in church to get everybody. I was in a church the other day in South Carolina, a 92-year-old, 92. We were talking about this, and he happened to be at a meeting. He had never voted in his life. We got him registered to vote just like that. We did it online. We showed him how to register to vote. Done. How many of those in your churches? With something like 30 or 40 million non-voting Christians, if we're frustrated about the things that go on in the culture, it's our fault, y'all. It's just our fault. We've not done a good enough job of getting God's people engaged in the process. That's on us. And that's what Faith Wins is dedicated to fixing. We're going to do work like this. We're going to do small pastor meetings that turn to big pastor meetings, that find and create some more small pastor meetings, rinse and repeat, back and forth. We're going to be in your state this year. I'm going to grab David Barton, I think America's greatest living Christian historian. I'm going to have Bob McEwen, my buddy who's a former congressman. I'm going to have Pastor Rob McCoy. I may have some others with me, but we're going to be in your state doing these meetings. And sometimes it's just pastor. I want you to really focus on pastor meetings. I just want to have pastor leaders there. We'll have 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 at a breakfast or a lunch. That evening, man, I want to bring your church and your community out to see David Barton. I mean, that guy knows, goodness, he's forgotten more about American history since breakfast than you and I've known in our entire lives. And, I feel like I can teach you and your church how to get involved. David Barton teaches them why. And let's face it, without God, there'd be no religious liberty in the world. There'd be no America. Without America being formed with that idea of religious liberty, Judeo-Christian values being the cornerstone, we wouldn't have an America. There'd be no place in the world like this. It had never happened. Why would man ever do that and give up that kind of power? But America's founders did, and we're going to talk about that on another podcast too. But David Barton teaches that better than anybody I know. And that role that I ask him to fill when we go around is you put people in front of David Barton and they have an aha moment and they say, we got to get involved. We're going to be in your state. It's coming up soon. Watch faithwins.org to follow our schedule so you'll know exactly when we're going to be in your state, because we want to raise a level of righteousness in America. And that, my friends, is up to you and I. God bless you. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Faith Wins. Be sure to subscribe and share this episode. And remember, when pastors lead, faith wins.